Durham, North Carolina is a magnet for cutting-edge industries, forward-thinking organizations, and top talent. It's home to Research Triangle Park, global corporations like IBM and Cisco, and a thriving startup scene. Visit meetdurham.com to learn how Durham's intellectual capital and innovative spirit can elevate your next event.
Are you a
10, 9, 8,
Okay,
7,
so we're gonna be
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Executive Editor Beth Kormanik.
So I had the chance to sit down with two event pros and a journalist to figure out what's going on in Washington with the change of administration from an event perspective. So I talked to Nancy Shaffer, the CEO and founder of Bravo Events by Design, and Kindra Meyer, the executive creative director of Civic, that's owned by Ryan Seacrest. I also talked to Kevin Chaffee, who is the senior editor of Washington Life, who makes a living out of going out and seeing what's going on in the event scene.
David, one thing that's fascinating about these interviews is that they all agree that this was a transition unlike any other. And it raises not only ethical considerations for the event community to new considerations like security and ways of allocating budget for events in DC, as well as, what happens to the events that have nothing to do with the presidential transition. I mean, how are they affected as well? And so it's interesting stuff to listen to as we all watch what happens in Washington, but there are things that any event planner can learn from, especially as things like protest marches are happening all over the country and in fact the world. So this is a lot of great information, and we're excited to share these with everyone today. So
let's go and listen to Nancy. So we're here today with Nancy Shaffer, who is the CEO and founder of Bravo Events in Washington, D.C., a long-time event professional who really knows the market, who's been through many transitions. And we're here to ask Nancy, what the hell is going on in D.C. now?
It's a good question, David. First of all, thank you for having me. Second of all, I think that we're all still in a little bit of, I guess the word would be shock. It is a new normal that nobody has ever seen. I have been in Washington, D.C. for over 30 years, so I've seen a lot of administration transitions, and none of them, in fairness, have had this type of engagement from what I'm going to call the regular Joe or Josie, and it seemed to be a different type of group of people. We've done some inaugural work. We did not do inaugural work this year.
If you aggregate the demonstrations and the inaugural and things like that, it was really a pretty banner year for the fact of so many people participating in events.
In that respect, absolutely. So in what we're used to as the official or normal activities, this was completely the opposite. So to see our city kind of turned upside down in a way that I have not seen in a very long time. And full disclosure.
Changed what we need to be selling to people as event professionals? Is there you have like a demonstration module now?
I'm not sure if it's demonstration module, because I think that as a demonstration, they did a great job. I think that we have to help organize no different than we do every day. What are you trying to say, and what is your story? And I think that for my side of the business, as an event strategist and planner, I want my clients to understand that it's a tool, and that anything you do with a live experience and bringing people together, there has to be a purpose and a reason and a strategy. So there's a beginning, a middle, and really a beginning again. So for a movement or a demonstration, they did a wonderful job of assembling people. But there were absolute challenges that I witnessed that told me this was not done by a professional. The statements that were made, such as, there's a conspiracy, they're not giving us a permit. No, that's not true. It's Washington, D.C., and to get permits is a difficult beast. So I think it is a new opportunity, but it's also going to have to be something where we educate the movements and demonstrations as to how do you do that and how do you expand that from the live experience to the movement itself and then the future of connectivity. So it's hard for me to call it the women's movement because it was so diverse, but that's what the name is that the organizers put together.
But do you think that, are we having, is it a matter of dueling demonstrations now? You had the pro-life movement that did a big demonstration the next week. This is kind of normal business for Washington.
Yes, it is very, and I think that that's the part that our city is very unique in. This is somewhat normal. We're somewhat used to this. We are not used to the magnitude and the size of what these demonstrations have brought forth, or the consistency of them, that these pop-up demonstrations, which is really what's now happening, have continued over the last couple of weeks. The pro-life march comes every year. It's planned, it's permitted, they do it once a year, it's usually exactly the same time. It's ongoing. So you're prepared for those. It's these new activities where people need something to do and they're not really sure yet what to do. So it's real unknown territory in that respect. What is going to happen next week? We don't know.
And does it impact the planned events? Do you think about this?
Yes. I think about things like, okay, is the event that we are going to produce do a couple of things? We are producing an event, for instance, in April, which is a leadership development summit for social entrepreneurs that are coming from around the world. 2,400 fellows applied for 12 slots. We took 16. But many of them, as I said, they're global. So immediately, the first question was, are we going to be able to get everybody in? And I think that we're okay because I don't believe that we have anybody coming from those areas.
So this is a new question. This is a new question that you've never
totally
thought
new
about.
Question. Totally. It's a new question. It's a new dilemma. I think that the other part is that I think that organizations, particularly nonprofits, are going to begin to think about how their event may be reacted to, not by the people attending, but those not attending.
For an example, give us an example of that.
I know that when Planned Parenthood did a gala here, that they knew they were going to have protesters from the pro-life movement. Now, they were somewhat prepared for that because that's part of what they've been working with all along. But they added security because you don't know at what level anybody's behavior is going to be. I think that probably the big change, or one of the big changes, is that we're going to have to be really more diligent and ask more questions and think more about security at events that you may not have thought about it.
So when you say security, you're also thinking about smarter registration and better check-in, not just the eyes of the security guys making sure that people...
Absolutely. I need to know, does something seem... We need to have checks and balances so that when we're looking at something that is a private event, that there's a check and a balance that says, why does this look out of place? And dig down a little bit deeper to say, does it look out of place, or is it just that we are now more sensitive to things, so you pay attention in ways that you may not have paid attention before?
Okay, so let's say you have to do that. How does that impact the practical budgeting of these things? Is it a 20% hit on your budget, and then you have to take it from somewhere else, you skimp somewhere else, or is it an add-on?
I think it has to be. I think it has to be an add-on. It depends on kind of who the organization is. I think that for the corporate market, it's an add-on, and they know it's an add-on. And in their overall budgeting, there's always kind of a CYA fund that says, we know that something may potentially happen, so let's keep this fund here for those unknowns.
Is there
And
is there a rule of thumb on, like, is it always 10%, 15%? I mean, what do you do in the back of your mind?
So it kind of really depends. If you're producing something that's massive, that 10% is significant. If you're producing something that's much smaller and the budget is significantly smaller, sometimes 10% may not be enough.
Right.
And I think it also is a little bit bigger, but I think you're probably looking at anywhere from a safe bet would be probably between 5 and 20%. I don't want for our industry, and I know I don't want for Bravo, to become so scared and so cautious that we behave as horribly as the administration is to ban people from coming just because we assume something. And so it's a cautiousness that I think we have to look at is, what are those tools that I can have within registration? Can I ask you where you're from? Can I ask you what your organization is? Can I request that you provide me X, Y, and Z that I may never have requested before? If I am doing a sponsorship event and client A buys a $25,000 table, which gives them 10 seats, do I then have to impose on our point of contact that you need to find out all of this information about your 10 guests?
I mean, it's like going to the White House again. I mean, it's sort of like,
yes,
it's sort of like it's filtering down to everything.
It really is, and that becomes problematic. And I think that while, yes, there will be some registration issues, and I think that technology may be able to help with that, it does become time and overhead. So when I am looking at a project and I'm coming up with what our fee is, because Bravo is a fee-based company, I'm going to have to keep in mind that the process of registration management is going to now take potentially longer than it has in the past. And I have to make sure that I have allocated the right amount of hours, which means that I have priced my project properly.
Interesting. Let's go a little bit into the why people are doing events in DC. Let's say you're a corporation and you're trying to influence. Are you doing small events? Are you doing big events? Are you doing influencer events? What do you suggest to your clients if they need to? Everyone has a different purpose for doing an event. But if the purpose is to influence Congress, what is the strategy that works for?
Many of the organizations that are in Washington, or the offices that are in Washington for major corporations, are the government affairs offices. And there are lots of rules of what they can and cannot do. And so they have to wrap some of those events around education. So they're informational education events. So if it's a larger event, it's going to have a component in it of I'm educating my attendees on whatever my product, mission, objective is. For high-end impact, they are going to be smaller events.
Oh, you think so? That's kind of a Nancy rule right now, or a Nancy observation?
I think it's an observation.
It seems as though one thing that is also happening is that, which puts fear in the minds of event organizers, is the speed in which you need to react to an event, especially if everything is done by circumstance. And tomorrow, all of a sudden, another company's in play and they've got to do something, and they call you and they have to do an event within like 24 hours. I mean, do you think there's a fear of, or there is the opportunity for speed as one of the attributes of our industry to help corporations? Speed to marketplace.
But truth be told, we've been watching timelines shrink for a couple of years now.
We're ready for this.
Yeah, I mean, we're ready. So it's like when the only time that I have concern for my clients when they try to do something really fast is that because the majority of our client base is nonprofit, that they haven't done the planning for the fundraising side. Yeah. In terms of getting this together and producing it and making it a fabulous experience, that part I think our industry has learned how to master.
Great. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I want to end on sort of the dilemma not the ethics dilemma, but you're an event, you're in the event industry. An event has no political perspective, but if you're a caterer or if you're a rental company, I mean, how do you keep your political views in check and act as ecumenical as possible? Is that a challenge in Washington, or is it something that we have to do?
So it's interesting that you asked that question. We actually had this discussion in the office when somebody said, would you do inaugural events this year? And I said, before the election, I was fine. Either way it turned out, sure. If somebody came and said that's what they want, yes. This is not about who got elected. This is about the inaugural events and processes. It is our industry. Post-inaugural, I have had, as the owner of this company, I've had to rethink my belief, which has always been, I will do events that I choose to do. There are some organizations I will not work with, and that's I have that opportunity. This is my company. I get to pick and choose. Because I'm also providing a service, whereas a caterer and a rental company, in some respects, they provide a product. It is, I think, easier to be, and I might be speaking out of turn, and I'd be curious as to what my colleagues in those industries feel. But I think in some respects it's easier. You're going to have food. I might as well sell you that food. You're going to have tablecloths. I might as well sell you those tablecloths. When my role is I have to help you figure out how to make this a powerful and impactful experience. I'm not sure that's where I get the dilemma of, do I want to help you? Do I want to be the person who is so skilled at this that helps you do something if I don't believe in what you do? And I do think that it is going to be a challenge for many in our industry to decide who we choose to work with. Do we have to work with everybody? What do we do with it? You know, I go back to Buttercream Bakery, who got into the big dilemma with the inaugural cake, that they asked her to do something that she didn't realize she was copying exactly. And what she did with her profits, where she donated them to an organization that she chose to do. She said, but I'm going to be bipartisan. It is my position. It is how I'm going to be. If you want to buy one of my cakes, I will sell you one of my cakes. So it could be on the back end that in our industry, we have to choose how do we then become active in our own communities to make the change that we want to see.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting dilemma. I've had this conversation with many people, and once you get over the anger and the shock, is it back to business as usual ultimately?
I'm hoping that it's not back to business as usual, but I do think that it's back to business. Our industry is an industry based on small businesses.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, we all have to think about that. Some of us have, much larger staffs than others. I'm a small boutique firm, and I have to remember that I've got to keep the lights on. I've got to pay my staff. I've got to pay myself, and I've got to continue to do the work that I do with integrity. Yep. I then have to stand on that other side and go, okay, are you okay with this? I know for me, if the pro-life movement came and said, I need you to produce an event, I could not do that event. If the white supremacist came to me and said, would you do this event? We'll pay you $1 million. No, I can't.
Yep, that's interesting.
But that's my choice.
Yeah, that's your choice. That's America.
And so it is. It's a dilemma for our industry. I think it's a dilemma probably for the world.
Yeah.
We're seeing what happens. Nordstrom has pulled Ivanka Trump's products. Uber pulled back off of the advisory board.
Well, yes, because there's backlash commercially. So sometimes
exactly.
It's not their meat. It's much more practical. That
for them, it's about money.
Stay away from controversy.
Correct.
And so that's another piece. You have intellectual capital that you're giving to people in many cases if you're an event strategist as opposed to a vendor that's going to supply the AV.
Exactly.
So anyway, well, Nancy,
and we're all important. But
absolutely,
we all have to decide how to walk in this new world.
So Nancy, thank you so much. How do people get in touch with you to see if they can ask for your help?
Absolutely. You can reach us at our website is aboutbravo.com, and I can be reached at nancy@aboutbravo.com.
That's easy. So,
and I'm happy to talk to anybody about resources. If there are other people in our industry who are concerned or frustrated and don't know what to do and want to continue this dialogue, please feel free. I love being a resource to the industry. It has been a wonderful place for my career, and I've been at it for a really long time. So if I can be here to help anybody, that makes me a very happy person.
That's what we love about this industry. Thank you, Nancy.
So one of the fascinating things that I learned from that interview is the way that event planners are really wrestling with how to engage with the new administration. And, the DC event community has seen so many transitions in presidential power. They're used to working events from Republicans and events from Democrats. But what Nancy raised is the kind of personal dilemma of working with some of these groups that, on their face, most people would find reprehensible. She said she's not going to help a white supremacist group plan strategy for their event. And that is a perfectly reasonable conclusion. But, and it's not something that they faced before. So there's a lot of soul searching, I feel, that makes this year and these next 4 years potentially very, very interesting.
But you also had a big difference between the idea of being the strategist and then selling sort of event supplies. That she made a huge differentiation between that, which I found that was very interesting.
I agree to a certain extent, and she said she didn't want to speak for other aspects of other suppliers within the industry. I think that if somebody were asked to cater that hypothetical event, they would face the same conundrum too. I mean, it's do you want to be associated in any way with those events? Whereas if it's your traditional Republican or Democratic, leaning event, I don't think that question was really asked before.
Yeah, no, I found it totally fascinating. Why don't we go on to Kindra? Kindra is not a Washington person, but is one of the top event creative directors in the event world. And she experienced the Women's March. And it's interesting to see her reaction on how she took what she saw and how it impacted her daily life in terms of the events that she does. You've got an incredible perspective on events because you do this for other people. Here you are attending an event.
Right, yeah.
What did you think, looking at it from both an attendee and then also with your event organizer sort of understanding hat on? What was the difference?
Right. Well, I mean, it was a massive event, but there wasn't much structure. I mean, they tried to have a route, and they tried to have some bathrooms and a few screens set up. But I think they were expecting less people, one, and two, there wasn't any kind of brand support. It was all very grassroots. So I know I'm not sure how much money they actually fundraised. But I think if there would have been sort of additional fundraising, there probably would have been more screens. So part of the issue logistically was most people definitely couldn't see the stage. But a huge, I would guess 70% of the people there couldn't see or hear any of the speeches. So that was problematic. I muscled my way in, but once I got to sort of 7th and Independence, to a place that you could see a screen, you couldn't get in, you couldn't get out. You were pretty trapped there.
Did it matter?
I don't know if it did matter. I had a lot of friends that went that didn't see or hear any of the speeches, and were perfectly fine with that. I was glad that I heard some of it because I'm a white woman. I'm a queer white woman, but I still the things I feel so emotional about and so affected by in this election. It's really important and great to hear all the other perspectives, and the intersectionality was really high on the list of things talked about, and it's a good reminder, a good perspective. As an event, I mean, of course, it was problematic from we knew from the beginning restroom lines are going to be insane, and there's going to be no water and no food and these things offered. But they were pretty good. If you follow, if you downloaded the app and if you followed them on Facebook and got the emails, you knew what you were in for. And they, everybody came really well prepared. But I was really shocked at the lack of police presence, and I'm curious why that was, or if they were just sort of really well hidden and close by, because when I've attended other protests and marches in New York and other places, you certainly don't like seeing the guys with the big guns. It gives it a different mood and feel. But with that many people there, certainly a lot or mostly women, you don't expect to have a violent uprising, but at the same time, if there was infiltration, say from the other side, and in a crowd that packed, if there was a spook, it would have been a trample situation. So I was pretty curious. That was the most overt thing to me from an event perspective, was the lack of security and police, considering that.
And when you guys do events, you're always planning for these kind of contingencies.
Sure. And you always you overestimate. You overestimate what you need. So that was interesting. But there was very little from the actual event. I mean, everybody sort of went off and did their own things, because there were so many more people than anticipated that the route and the times and all that just went out the window. And I think, nobody had cell reception. So I had 50 people there. I couldn't find anyone because there was no cell reception. It was funny too, because when you got off the train, there was this big sign that Verizon had up that said something about, being the number one service, and I had Verizon. I was thinking that might not
they
be
may not have done the right thing.
That might not be the sign. You don't want to set the expectation and then have it not work. But so communication was difficult. But I think
if you were let's say they called on you,
sure,
because it seems like this is just the beginning of a movement.
Sure,
This is going to get a lot more sophisticated in terms of things. Where should they put their money if they needed to improve infrastructure?
Well, facilities, one, for sure. Just having the basics of...
It's like basic 101
the basics
stuff.
Of, water and security. Some security presence, just to sort of reassure people, I think would be nice. Maybe not guns out, but just so there is a presence, people you can ask questions. You don't... If there were, like, people in all yellow that you knew worked for the march, that you could find in the crowd. There was at least even 100 of them in and around where there were restrooms and facilities. I think that the water and restrooms and security, those would kind of be the first three things. And then after that, I think screens or even audio. And I don't know, maybe there was a way you could tune in. But again, because you didn't have reception, I suppose you couldn't have. So if there was a way to bump up the reception, because, I was a little bit bummed about not being able to be with my people. In the end, it was really a unique experience being by myself. And I think that was actually made it more powerful in a lot of ways. It wasn't a social occasion. It was, this really interesting moment where you did feel like you're all in it together. And so I was thankful for that in some ways, but, for others, if you got separated or if you have a child with you, or, there were a lot of children there. And
did you have a lot of conversations with other people that you didn't know?
I did. Yeah, definitely. And, I felt like an old person because, I packed all this extra snacks and waters, and I'd come up, be next to these groups of teenage girls who were all like, oh, we're starving, we can't get anywhere. I'd give them food and water, and they were all so excited and happy. And, I was like, oh, I'm now on the other side where I have the tissues. And so that was fun for me. And because I remember being a teen and going to concerts and things and just...
Those are the...
Oh, just assuming they'll be...
Those are the cues that get people to talk to each other. Are you familiar with Alex Pentland, who wrote the book Social Physics?
No.
How Ideas Flow?
Okay.
So we don't really judge an event anymore by how many people attend, but by how many conversations are curated.
Right, yeah.
And especially on that's the personal experience.
Right,
And so I think that it seems like I accomplished it by letting people talk to each other in ways that...
Yeah, well, and there were so many... the signs and what people were wearing were such fodder for conversation.
Well, the uniforms, the hats,
sure.
Those were brilliant, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, within my circles, there's a lot of, tension around the hats because people, a lot of people within my community say, well, they're exclusionary because they represent pussy, which means vagina, which is, excludes trans women, and, pink is white and all these sorts of things, which, that conversation, I think it needs to happen and is interesting. But on the other side of it, it made women feel good. It was a way to identify one another, because when I came in off the train at Union Station at 1 p.m. on Friday, my train was almost all women going to the march. And so they were flooding in, and then there was all the Trump inauguration people flooding at the same time. So it was the Trump hats, and then the pussy hats. And so you felt like you could find your people, right? You knew what car to get on because you could see that, and then you automatically knew you were safe with those people. So I think anytime there's something that, is a cue that makes you know that you're safe with others, especially when a lot of people are traveling by themselves, I think that can be a good thing. And, so, I understand some people thought it was represented a very specific thing. I think it, a lot of it came out of Trump's comment by grabbing by the pussy, and that certainly wasn't exclusionary of, just cis women. I think that speaks to all women.
But did you, from this experience, appreciate whether they did it on purpose or whether it happened by accident, the Trump rallies? The fact is what we do,
right.
The fact is that they were able to use face-to-face to engage people in ways that multiply the emotion,
right?
And the hats
right.
are both part of that. I found that interesting. I mean, I find what he said reprehensible,
right?
But the tactics that we use that are not political in events,
right,
are very powerful and have to be used responsibly,
right? Yeah, and it is nice. It's nice to have something that signifies your resistance in a way that you don't even, so that is, I in my lifetime have had, crazy colored hair and dress all these certain ways. And part of the reason I do that is an expression of who I am, but it's also partly a way because I know it starts conversation. So people will come up to you and start talking to you because of the way that you look. And I think that's one great thing that the hats did provide is you knew that person, at least on some level, was sort of in solidarity with you, so you could go talk to them. And I think a lot of conversations happened, at the march because of that, and the signs and what people were wearing, and like, oh my gosh, I love your sign. Did you write it? Did you make it? And then that's when, can I take a picture? And that's what created a lot of conversation of where are you coming from? Talk to me about your story.
So did what you experienced this weekend impact what you're doing at work this week and how you're changing the way you're looking at events or anything? Has that had any?
Not necessarily. All these things changed the way, I think I approach my work, and part of that is my career, right? What I want to do in the world. I mean, certainly this election and the feeling I got, and the message over and over and over of this isn't just today. You have to take this back. You have to bring this into. And I've always been a pretty staunch feminist in my life. You don't get to be executive creative director, which is a position rarely held by women, if you aren't fighting for your place in the world as well as bringing up women in this field around you. And I think that when you have the opportunity to staff your events and hire your directors and your producers and making sure that you're inclusionary in all those ways, that you bring into your work for sure. And I think Civic, we're lucky because we do a lot of that anyway. And we have brands like Lifetime, so they're working on the Fempire and really bringing in more positions of power to women and people of color in the industry. And so those things, yes, from an event perspective, I don't think necessarily, but the one thing that is inspiring is how it all came about. The fact that it was some grandmother somewhere that said we should have a march, and then all of a sudden, and it just happened organically, and then there was hundreds and hundreds of offshoots all over the world. I think that that in itself reminds you that just saying something, can really create a movement, and so I think that that's important, and that should come into what we do.
The rap that the thing got, that the march got from some of the journalists, were that the digital side was so brilliant.
Yeah.
And the logistical side was a step down.
Right.
And that we have to, as an event industry, make sure our event operations match the actions of our digital operations in some way.
It comes down to money, though. It comes down to money. And so I think, something like that, I think everyone forgave
I totally
everything.
agree.
Now, if that was sponsored by Ford or Verizon, you would get a million, you'd get killed.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference, right? And they specifically didn't want to bring any brand partners. Now, in the future, may they? Because I think it's perfectly okay to take corporate dollars in the future. And I think that that's something that, you have to get comfortable with. But I think that's the difference, right? I think, I was prepared for it to be a little bit of a hot mess because I knew that this was just thrown together by some women that wanted to make a difference. But yeah, if it was a brand activation.
However, though, let me sort of point this out. If we should probably have tools so people can create customer service aspects using Twitter that have nothing to do with money. Ways of ingenuity to think out how we can move people that doesn't cost billions of dollars in brand support.
Sure.
I don't know how to do that yet.
Right.
But I think it's a challenge to our industry to figure out how to make some of these activities more open source.
Yep.
And I think that's a challenge.
Yeah. No, I think that that's a fair point. And I think, part of it was that, they were hoping for 2 and got 5
plus. But it was like success that
success that caused a lot of the.
It's a good high class problem, as we say.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much for giving us your input. I wanted to get this right away because I was looking at this thinking how powerful events are in both sides of the equation yesterday. The symbolism of the inauguration and the passing of power. The traditions of the inaugural that were actually kept to a certain degree, and the fact juxtaposed with this great outpouring,
right?
Which gave us all hope that both sides may have
some humanity.
Humanity, exactly.
I needed a shot of humanity, right, after Friday.
So it's really fascinating to hear about the experience from inside the march. I don't think the march organizers knew there were event professionals among them kind of anonymously experiencing this event, but they bring a really interesting perspective. And Kindra, I think, touched on some interesting points like, for instance, corporate brand support that really didn't exist for this march. And I think that, the question is, would that have been in keeping with the ethos of this event? And the answer is probably not. I don't think it would. However, in the future, going forward, maybe there are like-minded brands. We certainly saw in the Super Bowl, for instance, brands taking a stand, whether it was, Audi with equal pay for equal work among the genders. And so it was interesting. They definitely could have done a lot with that money from corporate support, but maybe on the first time out, it just wouldn't have felt right to have this grassroots effort brought to you by Brand X.
Well, yeah, but I'll tell you, it opened up my eyes big time. That interview with Kindra was one of the seminal moments in the way I think about events. Like, we talked about open source concepts. Like, if there's a nonprofit that can make these basic things available, maybe that's another answer to help free speech. We're doing it on the open source side of digital, but it's much harder to do when you're talking about staging, lighting, and signage and AV and things like that. So maybe there is a way to make some of these things available for your causes in a more open source way.
Right. This was a historic march. This is the largest in U.S. history. And so you take that starting off point and we're in this digital age and the world is different from the last generation of protest marches. And so I think that going forward, you have to think about these things in a different way. Whereas for this historic, first march of this administration, Kindra said, you knew what you were in for. Everybody kind of understood that bathrooms might not be available for a while, or you needed to bring your own snacks.
Yeah, they kind of got it. They understood they're going to be in for a rough event experience.
Right. However, the organizers, they had an app. They knew that they needed to plan for, certain digital expectations. Who would have thought there would be apps for protests? You know?
Demonstrations in the digital age.
Exactly.
This is like a whole new set of things that we have. So next we're going to Kevin Chaffee, who has been a friend of mine for many years, which you will hear. And he kind of gave us a different perspective on what's going on. And it was kind of like what it's like I thought, of being in the bubble of Washington. And it's kind of ho-hum. So let's listen to Kevin. So we're here with Kevin Chaffee, an old friend I've known for more than 25 years, I believe, who's the senior editor of Washington Life, who is out on the scene a lot in Washington, D.C., especially as the new revolution has happened. So I wanted to get a sort of a beat from him on how things have changed, other than just the normal transition. So Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Well, it's a little too soon to say about what's really changing. I mean, obviously it's a new administration, and it's going to be things will come from the top down, affecting the local environment. It's been that way with every president, but it does take time for them to, get things rolling.
Do you think that Washington's social world is going to be open to these guys, or they're going to be kind of pariahs?
Well, I think that might be a combination of the two. I mean, there's a lot of people who are coming in who are already known here. I mean, some of them have been, especially some of the billionaires, et cetera, who well known in New York, and people in Washington have ties to people in New York, and for example, like the new Secretary of State knows a lot of people here, and the new I guess he's not confirmed yet, but the likely new Secretary of Commerce does. They're not going to, nobody's going to turn their nose up at inviting them. They'll be lionized, I think. Just as their predecessors from other administrations, have been, because it's the job, and the job here.
Right.
That's
but do you think that you're going to see many more sort of high level dinner parties than in the past because they can afford to do them?
Well, the high level dinner parties kind of died out long ago. So that's not to say that like some embassies, for example, don't have them, but it's kind of not like the era of old where you had these great hostesses who had bipartisan dinners. It's a shame that has stopped, because I think they were very useful, where people would break bread together who might be adversaries, and they'd have to behave, and they'd sort of smooth things out and make contacts that they might not otherwise have done.
Do you think that it's repairable, the whole divide at this point?
Well, I don't know if you put it on a Richter scale, I don't know how different it's going to be from other similar type situations where people had, very vastly differing opinions, including Watergate, and including the Vietnam War, and including, the impeachment of, President Clinton, the Iraq invasion by President Bush. I mean, those were very highly charged times as well.
So you're seeing kind of business as usual.
This might not be any better or worse.
Yeah, so you're saying this is kind of business as usual.
Well, at this juncture, I would say, yeah. I mean, it's, given that there is some extra charge there, where people are just hoping it's not going to go more downhill.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that I'm hearing that hosts are interested in making sure that the security is tighter, so that it's not about the guests who attend, who are invited, it's the extra unwanted guests and the infiltrations and things like the protests?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't say I've ever really, remembered a time when someone having a private party was that concerned about security because they might have a somewhat controversial guest coming. I mean, people do tend to keep these things under wraps, if it's private and if it's in a private house. And the embassies, of course, they keep it all very nonpartisan. So, as I said, these causes that they have here that people can get behind, that's a unifier.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point, that the causes will sort of level out some of the issues in terms of personal.
Well, right. I mean, you have a thing for cancer or for, juvenile, like these, medically oriented and educationally oriented things, or the cultural, things, the performing and visual arts, I went to a very big dinner for the opening a couple of nights ago at the National Gallery of Art for an exhibit on the work of the terracottas of Andrea della Robbia and the della Robbia family. And, it was a very mixed crowd. I mean, there were a couple of Trump people there, and, it was fine. I mean, people were curious, and, they talked to people, and, it's a nice time to, nobody was, giving browbeating lectures to someone over dinner at the National Gallery, and it's very unlikely, I think, that would happen. God help us.
Yeah, no, I remember Ford Carter, Carter Reagan, Reagan Bush, Bush Carter, Bush Clinton, I guess Clinton Bush. I mean, it really has been pretty traditional over the years. From the outside view, you can see it looks a lot worse.
Right. Well, you have to remember there's also another unifying aspect here, and that is what I like to call the permanent establishment, the people who worked in these administrations going back to, Nixon, I guess, or something at this point. And, they stayed. They didn't go home. And they became part of the local social fabric, largely through mutual bipartisan friendships that they made over the years, and cemented by causes that they supported, along with people from opposing parties and dispositions and philosophies. And those people here are very much, I think, into seeing Washington as a community. And, you welcome the new administration people here the same way you welcome a new ambassador here. And they've been doing it time after time after time.
Yeah,
they're not that daunted by it.
This is very reassuring, actually, because outside of Washington, you hear the worst stories ever. And so it's good to hear that. And when you think about it, the Bush people hated the Reagan people, and then they were fine. The Clinton people hated the Obama people, and then they were fine.
Right.
So,
well, there are these people who are the unifiers, who, again, the permanent establishment, and they soothe things over and they mix it up. And I went to a big inaugural party. I mean, there were a bunch of Democrats there. I mean, they came just because, they came for our town. They came.
So who are those people?
Institution
who are those people? Who would be the sort of the top pillars of the? We used to call them the cave dwellers or the cliff dwellers.
Well,
right?
the cave dwellers are kind of, they were sort of a different species.
That's not even there anymore.
Chevy Chase Club or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But you look at someone like Lucky Roosevelt, who was the protocol chief under Reagan. And you look at the Kafritz's family and. Lloyd and Ann Hand. He was LBJ's protocol secretary, a long, long time ago. They're out, and and there's a bunch of other ones like that. I mean, those people are on the more older side, but there's some younger ones too, and they just because through the power of their associations and the fact that they remained here, again, they
who are those? Who are those people?
Pull it together.
If you can name a few of those, who would those be?
You mean the younger ones?
Yeah, the younger ones.
Oh, people like Jack Quinn, for example.
Right. Yeah, this is very, very reassuring to hear this. How about the Trump Hotel? Has that had any impact on the new Washington social scene?
Well, it's just sort of recently opened, and then it's coming. It's growing space here. I guess it's maybe more, the bar there is said to be popular with the Trump people because, let's face it, some of the Trump people might be afraid of what type of a welcome they would get in some other places. So, that's kind of a safe haven for them, I'd have to say. But, there's a couple embassies are having big events there. Bahrain did their National Day in December, and Kuwait is having its National Day there in a couple of weeks.
But do you think that the guys that are doing it there, the countries, are pandering?
I don't know. I guess you'd have to ask them. but I think it's also a wow factor. People want to do something in a place that's new and nobody's seen.
The other thing that I've heard is that I've never heard about as many people on the event side doing non-disclosure agreements. Have you noticed that at all? You're probably not on that end of it, so you don't see it.
Yeah, I'm not quite. You mean that where they can't tell anybody the event is happening?
No, where they can't say anything about anything, and they're tight non-disclosure agreements with the wait staff and the people that work on these things.
You mean more political things?
anything. They can't say anything, reveal anything that they heard, and they've got ironclad non-disclosure agreements.
Oh, well, I can't say that I've heard that, but I guess I don't know what to say. I mean, I just don't know anything about that. It's interesting. You're telling me something.
Oh, good. We're just seeing that on the when we go out and do our reporting, people can't say anything. The inaugural was a perfect example.
Oh, well, yeah, some of the inaugural events, they were like totally close. I mean, they were nervous you even knew about it.
Right.
But quite frankly, there was, considering what some of them were, I mean, I don't know what they were worried about.
Right.
I mean, if they're worried about demonstrators or something, I mean, I totally understand.
Well, I think they've got they're all security crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're going to have a gathering of people for whatever purpose, political or non-political, and you think there's going to be disturbances and people might be hurt or, have horrible things shouted at them just because they're going into a building. I mean, that's kind of sad. And we'd hate to see it come to that.
Yep. So how did you rate this inaugural versus others? The parties and things like that.
In terms of, well, there was quite a lesser number of events that just, I had on a calendar that one I was invited to and the two even that I heard about. So, I mean, I used to do like big full-page stories on a newspaper about, these are all the events and this night, and having 50 things. And, this time there was a lot less.
I think I'm still exhausted from 2008. I think I did 30 parties in like a week.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it's been that way. I first started doing these things back when Reagan came in 81.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for giving us a little sense of what it's like and actually very reassuring to show that Washington is alive and well and is not going anywhere.
Put oil on the water.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
I don't know what kind of oil, but
yes.
Oil.
Yes.
So I think one of the takeaways is really that no matter which first couple is in power, it's impossible not to be criticized for how you interact with the Washington social scene. You're always going to be outsiders coming in. And, even the Obamas throughout the Obama administration were criticized for not being social enough. So, whoever is occupying the Oval Office is going to be criticized for how they engage with the community because it's always going to be different. And maybe people who are used to hosting these dinner parties are not the ones who are hosting them now. And so it's always going to be an interesting transition. And I think Washington is a pretty insular community, and they have to kind of get through these transitions.
Well, that's also what. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I was in that bubble for many, many years. And it was clear as day when I was listening to Kevin that there is a bubble and that many people who live in Washington don't actually see what's going on outside and how it was sort of business as usual, but maybe it's not. And I think it gave me a little bit of pause to see who is right. There's no answer, I don't think, here.
The cultural and social life of Washington continue. They will always continue. And, one thing I did want to point out or discuss was the conversation you had on disclosure agreements.
Yeah.
And this is really chilling. I think it's taking information that used to be public or that these event suppliers used to be able to share and not letting them do that. And, we ran into this during the inauguration because we obviously part of our mission is to report on who's working on these big events. And it's interesting to see who's doing that. And it's also great for those companies to be able to say they're working on high profile events. But, that's now being taken away from them. And as journalists, we like the free flow of information. As event suppliers, they like to be able to trumpet the work that they're doing. And I find it really unfortunate that these non-disclosure agreements are proliferating.
Well, I think that in the events industry is just one piece of the non-disclosure. Non-disclosures are terrifying Washington, from what I hear, almost in every aspect of what people are doing. And they're trying to be ironclad and they're lawyering up. And it's something that I think we're going to hear a lot more about. Especially,
this is the start of the administration, and people who are eager to work with them and continue their businesses are going to adhere to them. And I think there's a lot of fear right now. What happens if you if word leaks out. Non-disclosures aren't anything new. Certainly wedding planners have dealt with them for quite some time on high-profile celebrity weddings, corporate events. We will reach out to planners who work on these events, and they'll say, I'm sorry, we signed an NDA. We can't tell you about this event. We understand that, but this is a new area in Washington with these high-profile events that used to be, you used to be able to report on them, and I find it chilling.
I totally agree with you, Beth. What's interesting, what I found, is that we have a president who's kind of the event planner in chief when you think about it. He's into producing events, and when you watch things like Apprentice, 80% of the things were involved had some event element to it too. Beth, what did you think about these interviews? Did you have any sort of closing remarks?
I find it interesting, and I think if I were a supplier in the event industry, I would be trying to find out where I fit into this new ecosystem. So you have security companies. They're clear winners right now. Everybody is going to need good security, and the companies that have the best reputations and solutions for this new era are going to do well. You mentioned registration, and I would add staffing to that as well. If you have discrete event staff who are well trained and know how to use this registration software and to make sure you don't have any party crashers, for instance, or worse than party crashers are people who may be disruptive or actual security threats. So those are examples of suppliers that I think are going to do well. Nancy mentioned that for corporate events, they're going to have the budget to cover these extras now. But if you're a nonprofit, now maybe you're looking at places where you need to cut. And so if I'm a supplier, I'm thinking, how do I make my worth to an event evident? How do I sell them on what I'm supplying? So that's going to be a challenge for everybody going forward, and something to think about.
When you said security, we also have to make sure that Putin isn't listening in from a digital security perspective as well. So
never know.
You never know. So Beth, tell us what's going on at BizBash.
We are so excited to be publishing our first edition of the BizBash Best, which is the reimagined national venue and supplier guide. You will find venues for your events in 17 cities across the United States. We are also thrilled to be releasing our first ever supplement to this guide, and we're focusing on downtown Manhattan, which is such an exciting place. David, I know you know much is happening down here. Both of them are coming out now, and so look for those either in your mailbox. This is a real magazine that you can hold in your hand. Paper. However, we also have digital versions, of course. So we're thrilled to be producing that this year, and keep an eye out for that.
Let me thank everybody for listening today. We love what we do at the GatherGeeks podcast. And Beth, tell us where people can find us.
Yes, you can subscribe to GatherGeeks on several platforms on your Apple devices. You can subscribe on iTunes or in the podcast app on your iPhone or iPad. We also ask that you rate us in those applications because it helps other people discover GatherGeeks. On Android devices, there are lots of podcast apps, including Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play Music, and Pocket Casts. And we ask that you send us your feedback to @GatherGeeks on Twitter. You can email us to gathergeeks@bizbash.com. You can even call us at 413-624-GEEK. That's 413-624-4335. And we'd just like to thank you for listening and hope you'll join us for the next edition of GatherGeeks.
Durham, North Carolina is a magnet for cutting-edge industries, forward-thinking organizations, and top talent. It's home to Research Triangle Park, global corporations like IBM and Cisco, and a thriving startup scene. Visit meetdurham.com to learn how Durham's intellectual capital and innovative spirit can elevate your next event.